Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Stay Healthy at Home webinar series. My name is Ashley Ritchie, and I'm the director of the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project, which is a program of the ARC of New Jersey. I'm going to give everybody a couple seconds to settle in and join. I see attendees are coming in now. So before we get started, I just want to give everybody a little bit of time to get in the webinar and get ready. Just a quick reminder, this is a weekly webinar series, and we welcome questions and comments throughout the webinar. You can submit your questions and comments in the questions box in the control panel, the GoToWebinar. So you'll see the questions tab, hit that little triangle, and a questions box will drop down where you can submit any questions or feedback that you have. Also, in the handout section, you will find a brochure and a copy of the slide set that will be presented today. So I am so excited to welcome a guest presenter today, Adam Kugler. Adam is the director of the ARC of New Jersey Supported Employment Program, Project Hire. He brings over a decade of vocational rehabilitation experience to the agency, and he manages the day-to-day operations while simultaneously planning for the future of the program according to industry standards and trends. These factors contribute to the continued success of Project Hire, which is the largest and oldest provider of supported employment services in New Jersey. Adam is proud of the agency he directs and is always eager to seek out new opportunities to enhance services for participants. He embraces technology as a way to improve outcomes for participants and to maximize efficiency for Project Hire staff members, which leads to even more direct services provided to New Jersey constituents. True to the mission of the ARC of New Jersey, Adam, as the director of Project Hire, aims to be a source of information and guidance for anybody interested in learning more about the ever-changing field of supported employment and how best individuals can navigate the various supports and services that exist to help those living with disabilities obtain and maintain competitive employment. So again, thank you so much, Adam, for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Just gonna jump right in here and just kind of start. I'm gonna be giving you an overview of supported employment. It is a little bit of a system, I guess I can say. It's been changing, especially in these last few, maybe 3-4 years. It's really changed quite a bit, and for the better, I would say, definitely. And with that, there's a lot of misinformation floating out there or old information. And so sometimes it's good to just kind of see where we're at right now. And that's what my presentation aims to do, is sort of just let you know a little bit more about it, what it looks like, and also just how it's implemented, because that really can help you get the most out of the service. That's kind of my purpose here. Just like Ashley said, feel free to put any questions you want inside. I'll answer it towards the end of the presentation there. And then also, just for the record, if anybody is interested afterwards, please feel free to give me a call. Supported employment is a very individualized service, and each person in it may have a slightly different experience. And so sometimes it's better just to talk to me directly, and I can answer a lot of questions more specific to your case. But in this presentation, I'm doing my best to kind of show what's universal to everybody here in New Jersey. So let me just see. There we go. So before we even start, we got to figure out, like with anything, you want to know what's the outcome that we're looking for. And so with supported employment, the outcome, the goal, whatever it is for the people that utilize it, really is competitive employment, competitive integrated employment. So what exactly is that? I'm just going to move this thing out of the way so I can read it. Competitive employment is work that is performed on either a full or part-time basis, in which individuals are compensated for their work in an integrated setting. The compensation paid must be at or above the set minimum wage, but not less than the wages paid to individuals who are not disabled, who perform the same or similar work. So what that really means is working in a position that's integrated, and what that is referring to as is that there's people living with disabilities and people without, and then the work being performed is being compensated at the same rate as other people who perform the similar duty. There are other types of employment, such as shelter or enclave you may have heard of, but individuals who work in these arrangements, they're really not able to access the same services as those who work competitively. And so I'm really focused on that competitive employment, which is achieved through supported employment services. So what are some of the benefits of working competitively? For many of you on this call, it's probably very obvious. Maybe for some it's not, but I just like to always do a quick review. When you work competitively, you have a self-determination and choice in your employment, because you're out there looking for a job that's right for you. You can achieve more independence through the earning of your own income that you can use what you need for what you wish. People who work have an increased self-worth and higher self-esteem, and I would say so far you might notice all of these things are true for people who live with disabilities and people who do not. That's the idea. Opportunities gained from being in the community, being out and working in the community gets you connections to different people and different career paths and all sorts of different things. So there's an opportunity in just being out there and participating. People who work competitively actually do have the potential to earn more than their Social Security or Social Security disability checks alone can provide. And you can maintain Medicaid. People can learn new skills, both technical and social. And there's potential for personal growth when people leave their comfort zone. I think that's very true for anybody. When you get kind of out of your comfort zone, you get new challenges. That's where you really have that personal growth and then a gained sense of belonging and being part of something larger than oneself. So essentially, if you put it all in one word, really, or 3 words, I guess, quality of life. That's what working competitively can help you get a better quality of life. So New Jersey, from a legal standpoint, is what's considered an employment first state. So this is an initiative that it presumes that people with disabilities can and should work. It creates the expectation that people with disabilities, just like anybody else, will need to opt out of employment rather than opt in. So this kind of mindset, it does guide policy and resources related to the employment of persons who live with disabilities. And then it helps define the primary service that individuals living with disabilities utilize when obtaining and maintaining competitive integrated employment, supported employment. That's the service. So supported employment, this service that people use to become gainfully employed, what is it? It does differ slightly between funding sources, so kind of depends on who's paying for it. But supported employment in general, it really assists individuals in obtaining and maintaining competitive employment in an integrated setting, or employment in which individuals are working towards competitive employment consistent with work skills, interests, and preference of the individuals, with ongoing support services that can include assessments, job development, job sampling, job coaching, customized employment, and long-term support. So these are all some kind of buzzwords of different activities that somebody receiving supported employment may do. Really, the 2 major services for supported employment are job development. So get comfortable with that word. That is looking for work. Through application development, resume, cover letter development, interview preparation, contact with employers with and on behalf of the participant. So that's that looking for work or pre-placement, I hear it called. Then there's also job coaching. Job coaching is assistance learning tasks and workplace adjustment, counseling on inherent challenges of work, and assistance developing communication between the participant and the employer. Job coaching is truly like a coach. If you think of like a football game, the coach isn't out there right next to the player moving the ball for them. No, the coach is at the sidelines and sees where maybe an issue is, and we look at it and we work on it during practice, or perhaps suggest different strategies to try at the next play. It really is a vocational and educational position. So that brings me to my next slide, which is kind of important. Supported employment, it gets used a lot by different people. When I'm talking supported employment for the purposes of this presentation, it's how it's defined by the folks that pay for it, so the state. And so there are limitations to it, or preconceptions sometimes people have that can make it so expectations don't match what the service actually is. So supported employment, like I mentioned, it's considered to be a vocational and educational service. One thing to always keep in mind is that 100% supported employment staff presence, meaning a supported employment staff member being with someone on the job 100% of the time, is really not possible for the long term. Supported employment also, which some people don't know this, is not the only service that can be provided at a paid job. So if you have needs for someone, it does need to be there 100% of the time. It doesn't mean you're out of luck. It just means that supported employment staff may not necessarily be the people that you need on the job with you. And so if you have those needs, there are different services than supported employment that can be provided while you're working. These can be called community-based supports. That assists with interactions and task prompting. Behavioral supports, so that's someone that can be there in case certain behaviors occur. And then personal aid services, safety monitoring, transitioning, any medical issues like maybe regular injections or something like that. These are things that are taken care of by someone else besides the supported employment provider. So that's the definitions of what we're working with here. So before you even start looking for work, if that's something that you're interested in doing, there are some ways to prepare so that you can get even more out of the service than if you just sort of sign up and roll with it. So to get the most, these are some things you can do to really improve those chances of finding that great job that you love and being successful using the supports that are available. Supported employment is designed to fade away, so moving towards independence is always key. Building a good foundation from which to start looking for work, you are going to have much better luck and you're going to be more successful out there. So there's some things to do that you can do even just at home or before you even apply for some of these services. And one thing I always like to throw out there too is just remember, everybody, your first job is really rarely your last. Everybody started somewhere. And people who live with disabilities are no different. You may work at one job and you've gotten what you needed to out of it. You put it on your resume and you might apply for a different job. That's totally okay. So this is just a little diagram here of where to start. So that path to competitive employment really does start with a strong foundation, and the stronger it is, the more successful you're going to be. And so that foundation is that development of independent skills, so completing tasks without prompt. You might have noticed that I mentioned that supported employment for the long term really cannot have someone there 100% of the time. And so developing those skills to being able to move from task to task or manage priorities will help you greatly in relying on that person being there less. Once you've kind of developed those skills, you want to look into your skills, your strengths, your interests, and your weaknesses too, just to be aware of them. But really those interests are more what's important, because that's going to direct where you look. Seek experiences. They may not necessarily even be work related, to develop some of those skills. Either work on ones that you might want to improve upon, or develop those ones that you already have an aptitude for. And then finally, once you've done that, that's networking. I'm sure all of you have heard that saying, to find a job, really does help to know somebody, and that is very true in employment search. I can say that from personal experience. So networking is such a key, because the supported employment staff can only do so much, and the more you've networked before you've even gotten to them will improve your outcomes, definitely. The idea is this foundation can be worked at any time, and there's very little cost to it, if any. So some things to think about at home, and these are also what I'm mentioning here are things to when you're creating that resume. Even if you've never had a job, these are these things that you can put on that resume and make a skills-based resume. So things you do at home, household activities, any of the chores, setting the table, trash sweeping, really anything that you do at home. That's the key, is that it really is anywhere. The idea is developing independence. It almost doesn't matter what you're doing. So why? Having those independent skills and those priority management skills, showing an employer that you can take responsibility and follow instructions, those are universal regardless of what employment history you have. Some things to think about when you're in the community. Think about who, people you know or are known by in the community. Attend community events, volunteer. Look to your recreational department, animal shelter, food bank, firehouse, police station, first aid squads, any businesses, seasonal activities, libraries. These are all great places to meet people. While perhaps you may not find a job at those places, you may be introduced to someone who can be in a position to hire you somewhere else. One example I gave was we were working with somebody and we were really struggling to figure out, where really is a good fit for this person. And, we've been on some interviews, we had a few unsuccessful placements, and then we kind of went back to the drawing board and we're like, well, who do you know? Well, so just so happens this individual had their hair cut at the same place since they were old enough to get their hair cut. And so we just went right over there to that barber shop, and they hired him as a storekeeper to help keep the place tidy, sweep up and let people know to take a seat, make sure the water coolers, things like that. And so there we found a job because they were known by someone in the community. So the reason why you do this, just like I said, you just really want to build that network and have those relationships and interact with the community. Some other things you can do that are a little more structured than those informal ones is that, teams, coaches, instructors, take lessons. I know people go to the gym, not so much anymore, but hopefully eventually we'll be heading back to that norm soon. If you can get in touch with, if you're still in school or if you're have a fitness centers in the neighborhood. These all develop things like teamwork, listening skills, communication, problem solving, decision making. The idea is just to reach out and experience as much as you can to build up that foundation. Because all in all, what makes you a good friend, what makes you a good athlete, team or student, community member, volunteer, these are all things that make you a great employee, even though you maybe have not had an official job yet. These are all very, very universally accepted skills that any employer is looking for. So now that we've talked about that foundation, what you can do on your own, let's look at what help is out there. How do people get supported employment so they can find those competitive positions? In New Jersey, it's state agencies are where you start with that, or I'll refer to them in this as funders, because there's different agencies and then they fund the services. So these are the major ones. For vocational services only, so that's like work or even sometimes post-secondary school, vocational services are looked at by the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. That's where basically everyone starts. If you live with a visual impairment, the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired is the sister agency of DVRS, and they can be accessed for more resources that are specifically related to folks living with visual impairments. Then there are also full spectrum of life services that pay for supported employment. So this would be the Division of Developmental Disabilities. They pay for lots of things outside of employment, but they also pay for supported employment. So there's a little more detail here. The Division of Voc Rehab, or DVRS, this is a state-run agency that provides vocational services for anyone who qualifies and possesses, this is their official definition, any physical or mental impairment that's a substantial impediment to employment. Services are arranged and approved by a vocational rehabilitation counselor, so that's who's in charge of all the services, and these are just some examples of some of the services they will authorize. Vocational counseling, placement, on-the-job training, supported employment, community-based work evaluations, job-seeking skills. They can help with job accommodations. Sometimes they have training. They also can help with college advice for individuals that qualify. Physical and emotional restoration, mobility equipment, that's something too. Driver training and vehicle and home modifications to help improve independence in some circumstances, I obviously can't promise anything on behalf of them, but I have seen them go so far as to install things in people's homes so that they were able to get an individual who utilized a wheelchair. But the problem was she lived on a second floor and couldn't get to her transportation for work without someone to carry her down the stairs because it wasn't accessible. And so they were willing to install a lift in that scenario to get to the job. Like I said, I can't promise you that, but that's just an example of what I've seen. The Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, like I mentioned, they are a sister agency. They have virtually the same services, but they have a few more that are more specific to people living with visual impairments. So they are more versed with that assistive technology, different computer training to utilize different computer programs that can allow people without any vision actually to interact with computers. And the Joseph Cohn Training Center is an independent living center in New Brunswick that people who are blind actually can go there for weeks at a time and train on things like using the stove, navigating to the kitchen, things like that. And so now onto our other agency, the Division of Developmental Disabilities. This is an agency that provides public funding for services and supports that assist New Jersey adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities age 21 and older to live as independently as possible. Services and supports are available in the community from independent providers and 5 state-run developmental centers. Participants must qualify for Medicaid and meet DDD's eligibility criteria. So what's important to note is that supported employment is paid for by a lot of different people, and figuring out at what point does which funder pay for it, that's the trick. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit here. It's not impossible, but it's a little confusing, but hopefully I can explain it well and answer any questions. But just know that everybody who receives services from DVR or CBVI may or may not qualify for DDD. They are separate entities, so it's possible to qualify for both or one or the other. But just know that for anyone, regardless if you qualify for DDD or not, the Division of Voc Rehab is the primary funder for those initial supports, meaning DVR is the first place everyone goes for supported employment services, regardless if you qualify for DDD or not. And we'll get more into that later. So who actually provides the services? So like I mentioned, there are funders, meaning the funder authorizes the services, but when you go to your DVR counselor or talk to your DDD support coordinator, they're not the ones providing the services. They're just authorizing them. So who's the one who's actually out with you on those jobs or at those job interviews, helping that process along? When it comes to supported employment, the service is provided by agencies around the state paid for by the funders I just mentioned. The funders approve these agencies, and then the participant is, under most circumstances, can choose which agency is best for them. There are hundreds of agencies in New Jersey, and with different service areas and different specialties and all sorts of stuff. So that's why support coordinators and vocational counselors help people select an agency by giving them options. So in the DVR / Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired sector, they have vocational counselors. And the vocational counselors, they'll approve services and then authorize a service voucher. So what that means is if they want someone to find work, they will authorize what's called a pre-placement voucher, and they will send it to the agency that you choose to go with. In the DDD system, the support coordinator writes the selected agency into the service plans. And so then that's how they authorize supported employment services. So getting back to that very confusing concept that really a lot of people struggle with, and I'm sure I'll have a lot of questions about it, but supported employment in New Jersey does have primary and secondary funders. And if you kind of understand where you sit in this, it will help you know who to call and when to really get the most out of supported employment. So technically speaking, both the Division of Voc Rehab and the Division of Developmental Disabilities, they both provide supported employment, the exact same service, which is confusing because those are different funders that sometimes people have both. There are people who qualify for both DVR and DDD at the same time. So because that's confusing, they made a memorandum of understanding between the two agencies that states the primary funder of supported employment services is the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So in pretty much all cases, DVR is the agency that funds initial supported employment services. Now, initial supported employment, that just means looking for work, right? Because that's before you have a job. And then intensive support those first few days or weeks of hire at a new position. So that's just to get stable is what they call it. So that primary part, regardless if you qualify for DDD or not, you should be trying to go through the Division of Voc Rehab first. Then the secondary provider, that is the Division of Developmental Disabilities when applicable, meaning there are people who do not qualify for this and may only qualify for the Division of Voc Rehab. But either way, the primary place you go is the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, but the secondary is DDD. And they cover traditionally long-term support. So for those, so we'll do a little diagram, but as simply as I can put it, for most people who qualify for both services, the Division of Voc Rehab and DDD, they will get help from DVR to find a job, get stable, and then at that point, the case then is transitioned over to their DDD case if they have one. So this is hopefully the will help explain this a little bit. What I'm going to do is when I finish this slide, we're not totally at the end of my presentation, but this is probably a good point for questions to get caught up because a lot of people have questions about this. And so let me do my best here, and then I'll answer any questions to see if I can clarify for you. So DVRS and DDD, you really see that these are two different funders that pay for the same services. And so it's kind of confusing who pays for what and where you go for what. So the way to think of it is this, is that for people who receive supported employment, there are three kind of categories to think about. So there are people with the least support needs, so people with very little need to work independently. There are people with some needs who need a little more, and then there are people with very severe needs who have a lot of support needs to work independently. These different people will go to different places for their services. So people with very little need generally will qualify for the Division of Voc Rehab, so they can go there for vocational services, but it's possible they do not qualify for DDD because their need is not severe enough to meet that criteria. There are people who have some needs, and these are people who qualify for both. They may qualify for DVR because they have that medically documented barrier to employment, and their needs may be severe enough that they will qualify for the DDD system as well. So people with some need are in this middle category that qualify for both services. And then finally, there's people with the most support needs. So these would be people that really do need a lot of support to work independently, so much so that the Division of Voc Rehab, they may make a determination when this person applies that, look, we just don't have the resources to help someone like this. That doesn't mean the end of the road. It just means you need to use DDD then, because you don't qualify for DVR. So that's what are these, three categories of folks. So if you have very little need, you only qualify for DVR, but you don't have a high enough need for DDD, your pre-placement and those initial intensive services are funded by the Division of Voc Rehab. And that would make sense because you don't qualify for DDD. For people who have some needs, so these are these folks that qualify for both the Division of Voc Rehab and the Division of Developmental Disabilities, their pre-placement services and intensive are also funded by the Division of Voc Rehab. And that goes back to that MOU that I talked about, where this is that primary funding, that primary services, looking for work and intensive help. So if you qualify for DVR, that's where you get it. And in this third category, though, we have folks here, these are individuals who went to DVR and DVR said, no, your level of need is too severe. We don't have the resources to help. They can go to their DDD budget. It doesn't mean supported employment is out of the question. It just means that this person would use their DDD budget to pay for those primary services, so looking for work and intensive help on the job. Now, that's the primary portion. So this row here is all the primary services. These are the secondary ones, which is called long-term follow-along. So long-term follow-along, that is a few hours a month of ongoing support until it's no longer needed. So for these individuals who have very little support need, they only qualify for DVR. They had their pre-placement and intensive services covered by DVR, would then also have their long-term services funded by DVR. Because they don't qualify for DDD, they would not be able to get those services. This is where there's a weird little switch. For folks that are enrolled in both systems, this is where the funding source switches. So in this scenario, someone with some needs who qualifies for both systems gets their pre-placement and intensive funded by the Division of Voc Rehab. Once they're stable on the job, the case then is moved to DDD. So now we access the DDD budget to pay for supported employment services. And then finally, are people with the most support needs who only qualify for DDD, have their pre-placement services funded by DDD. And then finally, for the long-term, their long-term is funded by DDD, which would make sense because they don't qualify for VR at all. So I am going to pop it open. As far as so far, maybe I would like to stop. Are there any questions that I could answer?
Adam, there are a couple questions that came in. There was a question that said, are both agencies state funded, or do they also receive federal funding as well?
Yeah, it's a cocktail. So Medicaid, in the DDD system, Medicaid is funded both by the federal government and by the states. DVR has different services within it, some of which are federally funded and some of which are state.
Okay, excellent. And there was also a question that says, what if a person has a job with long-term follow-along from DDD and then wants a different job? Do they need to go back to DVRS first?
That's an excellent question. No, and that is a benefit of DDD. So not to try to get too far into the weeds here, but long-term services that are only funded by DVR, so DVR's long-term services specifically do not allow for that. These services are specifically for keeping a job. So if you are only in the VR system, yes, you would have to go back to DVR to reopen your case to look for work somewhere else. However, in DDD, that's a totally different story because you have control over your budget. And what you can do is you can continue. There's a few options to it. This is one of those things where it's going to be individual, depends on the situation. But we work with many folks who in this capacity, what will happen is they're getting their long-term services funded by DDD, and that's called supported employment. And so those will continue as long as you need them to. For someone who wants to develop their career, there is another service in the DD system called career planning. Most supported employment agencies also do that service, including Project Hire. So we work with many folks where we have supported employment being provided on site to help someone keep a job. And then career planning services are being provided to help them use that job to find more gainful employment. And so, yeah, if you are in that scenario and you'd like to do that, honestly, you can talk to your support coordinator about it, talk to your supported employment agency about it. It's possible they provide that service too, and then they can just add it on and you can do both, but that is only in the DD system. Anything else?
It looks like those are the only questions for
Okay.
right now.
Wow. So I've either totally bewildered everybody or I did a perfect job explaining it and no one has any questions.
It must be the latter.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Yep. So this is just a little bit of a different way of looking at the same thing. Just another, and something that you can do if you're ever kind of looking at, well, where am I in this big picture right now? So as I mentioned, supported employment, it's the same service. So what's funded by DVR is also funded by DDD. It's technically the same service. It's just who pays for it changes. And so what I have is you have your individual right here who applies for DVRS. And at this point, there is a break because one of two things could happen. Either you're accepted by DVR or you're not. So you apply for DVR. Let's say you're accepted. This is anybody who applies for DVR is accepted. This is what happens. They then can move on to pre-placement and intensive services once the VR counselor decides they're appropriate. So that's that, looking for work and intensive help. Simple as that. And they can receive those until they're stable at their job. Now, if someone applies for DVRS and they say, no, you don't qualify because your level of need is too great for some or any other reason that they have, then we have to ask, are you enrolled in DDD? Because if you are not, then you can reapply for DVR. I want to say it's a year. I think there's different circumstances, but if you were denied by DVR, I believe you can reapply then, but it's got to be a year. And then unless you're DDD enrolled, if the answer is yes, now you can talk to your support coordinator and say, hey, I'd like to receive pre-placement and intensive services. And for those folks, then they're placed, and then their long-term support is covered by DDD. So that's who pays for that. If we look back at this person up here who was accepted by VR, they get stable, and now we ask this same question, but we just ask it here. Are you enrolled in DDD? If not, nope. Then the long-term coaching is paid for by DVR. But if they are DDD enrolled, then at that point, there's that switch that I'm talking about where somebody's long-term funding then will move to their DDD budget if they have it. And so that's sort of the flow chart of how it goes down. So as far as the providers, there are lots of different providers out there that serve different counties and different service areas. The ARC of New Jersey's Project Hire, that's my program. Just like Ashley mentioned, we are the largest and the oldest in the state, so we're doing this longer than anyone else. But we do absolutely provide services under all three of these funders, DVR, CBVI, and DDD. So regardless of which one you qualify for, our services can continue. It just where the money comes from would change. Job development, we do job coaching. If you are interested in using our services, talk to your DED support coordinator or your VR counselor. Referrals can be sent right to me, and we are accepting in most of the state. We serve virtually the whole state. There's a few counties we're not operating in, but most of the state we do serve. So SSI and Medicaid and other benefits, I'll be clear, I'm not a benefits counselor. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but some of the things that I do know and can point you in the direction of people who are experts. If you are working, you are able to earn significantly more income than an SSI check can provide. New Jersey has one of the best, if not the most generous, I've heard, buy-in programs in the country called Workability. Medicaid Workability will allow people to earn up to 60 grand annually and maintain less than 20,000 in assets, and it's not including a primary residence or a vehicle, and maintain their Medicaid insurance. So I was able to throw that out there, njwins.org. That's free benefits counseling for people that are interested. You might want to reach out to them. at this website, they have, I think they have a form you can fill out and someone will reach out to you, but they can help you determine that. As you might imagine, it's very individual. Every person's situation is different, so it's difficult for me to just quickly say yes or no if someone qualifies or doesn't qualify on this call. As far as kind of the nuts and bolts side of it, we talked about what the goal is. We talked about what supported employment looks like, what the system kind of looks like, but this is where the rubber hits the road. How the heck do I actually get these services? So as I mentioned, regardless if you qualify for DDD or not, the first place you need to go to look for work and get intensive help on the job is your local DVR. There's one in each county, and you can visit this website here, the careerconnections.gov. Also right here, this is like a direct link. If you type it or copy and paste it into your web browser, it should bring you directly to the page that has the online referral form. So there's like a yellow button that says refer yourself online, confidential form. But so you would refer yourself online. You'll be contacted by the local office of the county you live in. You'll be contacted, and then they'll give you instructions on the actual application. So let's be clear, this is not the application, this is just a referral, because they need quite a bit for the actual application. So that's why they'll reach out. So look out for a call from them or a letter that's telling you to contact somebody. So once you complete that process, your case will be opened, and you can ask your vocational rehabilitation counselor about supported employment. Assuming that they agree and think that, because ultimately it is up to them to decide what services are appropriate. If they decide that is an appropriate service, you can choose an agency that serves your area, and then they will send an authorization to that agency. And then from that point, then once the agency receives the referral, they'll start work with you. So what if I'm enrolled in DDD? In case you haven't heard it enough, even if you qualify for DDD, you really do have to go to DVR first. It's for your benefit too, because ultimately that is the most expensive part of supported employment, is looking for work and intensive help. And in this case, it would be DVR that's paying for it, not out of your DDD budget. So it is in your best interest to get those services. But you will apply, same thing like we mentioned before at this website. But one of two things happens. Either you're accepted and you receive those DVR services, just like I described, or you're denied. And if you're denied, it doesn't mean game over. It just means that DVR is not going to be funding those services. What they should be able to do then is, if they do deny you, they should give you what's called an F3 form, or they give it to your support coordinator in some cases. But the main thing is you need to get that F3 form, because that form, it's proof that you went to DVR first, but were denied. Because as I mentioned, DVR is the first place everyone has to go. And so you have to actually, in order to use your DDD budget to look for work or get intensive help on the job, you need to prove to DDD that you did try at DVR but were denied. And that's what this letter shows them. Your support coordinator actually has to upload this to their computer system before they can even budget for supported employment. So that's something so that is one thing that gets lost in the translation a lot. And so it is appropriate for you to ask for that form if they deny you services at DVR. And then once you decide that supported employment is right for you and your DDD budget, and you're all ready to go, your support coordinator can help you choose an agency, and the services start that way. So what about those long-term supports? We just talked about looking for work and intensive help. What about the long-term? If you're enrolled in DVR only, you don't qualify for DDD, your long-term services can be funded by DVR, and that equates to 3 hours a month of job coaching support. And as of now, that's lifetime. So folks in that program get 3 hours of job coach support a month for the length of the job. If you're enrolled in DDD only, or both DDD and DVR, your long-term funding is funded by DDD. So if you're in DVRS, you actually will close your case with them, and then it will transition to your DDD budget will cover that supported employment. So you wouldn't need to work with them anymore. You'd work with your support coordinator. So one little pro tip here, if you do qualify for both systems, it'd be very advantageous for you to choose an agency that serves both funders. There are agencies out there that only work with DVR or only work with DED, meaning if you get placed, let's say you qualify for both systems, if you get placed in the DVR system and you're stable, but if you get placed by an agency that is not approved by Medicaid, you're going to have to pick someone else then to do your long-term supports. That may not be a problem, or it may be. It's just something to think about. For example, Project Hire, we serve both, so there's no problem. So what would happen for us is your DVR counselor would say, okay, I think this person is stable. Let's move them to DDD. Your support coordinator could give me a call. We'll write us into the new plan, and it's a seamless transition because there's no, like, you don't really see much of a difference. It's just on my end, I move the case over with the help of our colleagues at DVR and DDD. Such as a little piece of advice. So, and on that note, I am done, and I am ready for any other questions.
Okay, Adam. So we wanted to just revisit the topic of being able to work full-time and still maintain benefits. So, we've heard some folks say, my son or daughter with a disability isn't able to maintain full-time employment without risking their benefits, their Medicaid benefits. Can you just dig into that a little bit more and clarify, what it means to work full-time as a person with a disability who also receives Medicaid services?
Yeah, I can try. It's very individualized. And like I said, by no means am a benefits counselor. That's a different, different kind of thing. I said, I highly recommend if you have detailed questions about that, you contact njwins.org. They are way more versed than I am with it, but it's such a blanket statement. I can say that may be true in some cases and it may not be true in others. It just depends. A lot of it has to do with the assets, and has to do with what other types of income the person may or may not have. And that's where it can throw things off. But all I can say is that ultimately you would be able to make more money if you're working full time for a company where you can purchase your own benefits. That's the idea, is that you purchase your own benefits instead of using Medicaid. And that may not be in the cards for everybody. Like I said, I don't want to come off as that I'm an expert on it. It's so highly individualized, but it is possible, very possible to work full time. It's usually through a kind of complex process of getting that workability and then putting funds into different types of trusts to make sure that the savings don't go over assets, or that, because you can set aside expenses for like residence and a vehicle or transportation to work. I just am not the person, honestly, who sets that stuff up. That's not my specialty.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, I wish I could do more with that.
No, that's great. And we're going to provide a link to the NJ WINS or Work Incentives Support, network support in the questions box. And NJ WINS is obviously an acronym. We also wanted to highlight another resource in the handout section, our acronym list. So that will help to kind of demystify some of the acronyms that you might have heard today or you might hear as a person working in the service field. So let's see, we had some other questions about, can you speak a little bit more kind of about the responsibilities and the work of a job coach? What do they do? What's their role in supported employment?
Sure. So supported employment, it's, like I mentioned, it's a vocational and educational service. It is not an aid, and that's where it can get cloudy. What I have found is many individuals, unfortunately, received what they were told was job coaching when they were in school, basically when they were in high school. The people essentially were calling teachers aides or student aides job coaches, which isn't accurate, and it creates at times a misconception of what a job coach actually does. And so those expectations can cause some difficulties down the road. Job coaching is, think of it like a coach, like I said earlier, which is that a coach is not someone who's sitting there with the ball, moving the ball for you, moving your arms for you. Or what they're doing is they have practice, where you work on certain things that you can practice then in the real life, or the game down the road. And also the coach is at the sidelines and sees issues that might be out there happening on the field, calling someone back in to try something else. But it's very much teaching skills. Like that's what it's for, is teaching skills. Sometimes it can be misconstrued into behavior monitoring and task prompting. Like I mentioned earlier, that's one key distinction to understand, is that supported employment is really not meant to be 100% for the long term. At that initial hire, a lot of times it's almost 100% just because that's just the nature of the game, but eventually it is faded back. And the idea is that it's advice, someone who can help people be more independent at work, encourage those positive relationships between the employer and the employee. Honestly, ideally, the employer is talking to the employee, not necessarily the job coach about issues. That's what we're trying to facilitate, that and work towards that goal. It's very different for different folks at different skill levels, but the main gist of it is that it's skills training, teaching independence and helping people interact with their employer more positively.
Excellent, well said. We also wanted to discuss ISP meetings, or individualized support plan meetings. And do you see do you see job coaches as a member of a support team who can attend those meetings? And do you see a benefit of a person's supported employment team attending ISP meetings?
No, that's an interesting question. So it's an interesting question. I think in an ideal world, yes, that's exactly what would happen. But everybody's very individual, and the new system, one big, I always go to the weeds too far, but there is one big problem, and it's a huge oversight that I've been trying to explain to some of the powers that be. Supported employment is a direct service, meaning it's staffed by direct support professionals. And community direct support professionals in the Medicaid system cannot bill at the same time as other ones. And so what that means is that if the staff are going to be going to ISP meetings and there are other providers there, not everyone can get paid for their time, which is a weird overlook, it's a weird oversight. I would say it's going to be so individual. It's that if there's a serious issue that really needs to be discussed, then I don't see why that would be an issue having a supported employment person at the ISP meeting. What I can say on the other hand, though, is let's say someone's been working for 10 years. They have an employment person who comes, 3-4 hours a month, and things are going pretty well. There's no serious change. I don't really think that it would need to happen unless it was requested. I mean, like I said, it's very individual. It just matters on the situation. So it's one of those things I can't really say, is it always true or always not?
Okay, great.
I'm not sure the answer to the question. If it doesn't, just go ahead and ask another follow-up.
No, yeah, I think, what you're saying is, especially a job coach in working with a person and supporting them on the job, like you're saying, if there is a major issue, it may be helpful to bring that to the rest of the support team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's well said. Yeah, I think that pretty much, let me just double check our questions. If there are any last minute questions, don't worry, put them right in the questions box now and we can get to those. I'm just going to make sure they're all addressed. Yeah, and in general, this might be kind of an individualized answer as well, but in general, how many hours of support will a person receive from a job coach during their, let's say, first week or first month on the job?
I can kind of answer that. So like you said, it's very individualized. What I can tell you is what it says in the regulations. Whenever my staff ask me similar questions like this, the first question I ask is, who's the funder? Because even though technically speaking supported employment is supposed to be the same between each, it's supposed to be the same service, it's just not. Each funder has their own little nuances and ways of looking at it that just subtly changes the services or extremely changes the services. So as far as that question, there's a few ways to look at it. One, if you're going in the DVR, the Division of Voc Rehab System, it says it in their manual that the standard amount, this isn't a hard line and it isn't a limit, but the standard amount of time to spend looking for work is about 40 hours total of services. And the time spent supporting someone to get stable is about 60 hours total of services. And so at those junctures, DVR says that they need to have a meeting to decide whether or not they want to continue or if competitive employment is a realistic option. It may be, and it may be determined, yep, that's fine, we can keep going. It could also be determined the other way. So that's the kind of industry standard benchmark. In the DDD system, let's say you don't qualify for DVR, it's then at that point, it's difficult to say because there's a lot of other factors that aren't necessarily in your control. I would say that from experience, the numbers are similar. I would say most people, after about 60 hours of support at a new job, that's kind of where the determination is made, is that maybe, you know what, if it's really looking like you're going to continue, the placement may not be successful, or the placement is successful by that time. For most people, this is not true for everybody. There's always exceptions, but for the vast majority, that is a pretty good kind of estimator to see how well something's going. Because if we're going into like 80 hours, 100 hours of intensive services, it's probably not a great placement in most cases.
Okay, great. And Adam, there is one last question from Jacqueline. Jacqueline asked, what is the best way that support agencies can provide more unified and seamless services? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, do you have another hour?
Maybe another webinar.
Yeah, that'd be another. So there's a lot of different factors to talk about with that. I mean, for one thing, that I've seen some improvement with is that communication between DVR and DDD is. If you'd have asked me that question a couple of years ago, I would have said it was very bad and that there was basically no communication. Now there's like a little more, and that's helped because what people don't often realize is that someone like me, when I have to talk to the VR counselor and I have to talk to DVDD and I have to go through the plans and do things, these are all things that agencies can't be funded for. So all that expense gets kind of rolled into the very honestly meager rates that the state currently pays supported employment professionals at. And so one thing that really would help me provide much more seamless service is if DVR and DDD were able to do some of those handoffs more independently without having to have the providers honestly shoulder the expense to make that happen. So that's some of the issue that you may experience out there when there's a jarring switch between DVR and DDD. It's usually that they're relying very heavily on the provider to facilitate the whole experience, which is difficult because there is not funding for that. Another thing too, as far as the seamlessness, I mean, direct support professionals on a national level have an extremely high turnover rate. I mean, the turnover rate's above 50% across the whole country, and that's also related to some of those very low reimbursement rates and increased administrative costs that really bring those wages down, unfortunately, and that is where you see a lot of turnover. And I know that can be a complaint for many folks out there receiving supported employment, is that, oh, you know, my job coach changed again, it changed again. And for the foreseeable future, I don't see that changing. I mean, the rates for supported employment have gone up so little that it's just not enough. And the requirements have just gotten higher and higher and higher for agencies to provide these services. So those are, I mean, in a very, as nutshell as I can, I would love it if DVR and DED could facilitate that experience better and rely less on us to make the transition. That would help that be seamless in that area. And then as far as keeping the same support staff that really do that quality job of getting to know their participants year after year, the rates would need to change because there's just no way to keep staff for a very long time at what it's currently paid.
All right, and thank you. I just want to thank the audience for submitting really thoughtful
Yeah, those are good
questions.
questions.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and Adam, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
So,
And if people follow up, they can shoot me an email or give me a call, whatever you want.
excellent. So thank you all again for joining us. We hope you will attend another Stay Healthy at Home webinar series in the future. We're here every Tuesday from 2 to 3 o'clock. So I hope everybody has a great afternoon and take care.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.